Hey everyone, Corey here from Technology Elevated Smart Carb. Today we're going to look at installing a new SC2 on Sherco's 2020 SC300. It's a good looking bike. Appears that Sherco's had a really good season in competition this year, and this should be another good weapon for them next year. So we're going to go ahead and point out a couple of notable features real quick that you might want to pay attention to. First thing we want to bring to your attention is the location of the fuel petcock. It's in a bit of an unconventional spot. It's a little over toward the right hand side. You want to make sure that's turned off before we remove the tank for carburetor removal. Otherwise you take a chance of pulling this line off and running fuel all over the engine. Another point of note is the location for the fuel supply line, traveling underneath the intake flange and then connecting to the carburetor here. The new 2020 Sherco, in their literature, states that they have redesigned this intake into a new one-piece. It's 15 millimeters shorter than the previous year. That allows for a little better carburetor fitment. You note that the Sherco is very close to the transmission, and they have a special index for the key in, as they all do, but this is a little more critical. Make sure that this isn't touching. So we're going to go ahead and remove the seat and the tank and show you how to remove the carburetor from the new 2020 Sherco. Okay, we've removed the seat and the tank. We're going to go ahead and begin removing the carburetor. The first thing we want to do is to loosen the two screws that hold the cap and the slide in. So you need a 3 millimeter Allen wrench, long ones preferred. You can get down in there, get a hold of those two screws. I'm going to go ahead and gently lift the slide and the cap up out of the way, paying special attention to wires and hoses so we don't tear anything out. I'm going to gently move it over to the side. As always, when working with carburetors, we want to try to protect the metering rod or the needle. These can be damaged and cause running issues. They're kind of sensitive, and careful with them when you're working around them. Go ahead and remove the spring and the retainer. Slip the cable out of the slide, take the spring off. On this particular bike, they don't have the threaded in cable. They're using a regular conventional cable guide with the old style cable, which I kind of like, but that means we have to replace this and put this piece on our smart carb in order for the stock cable to work. Sherco's new design allows you to remove the carburetor without lifting the subframe, which I'm going to show you how to do. But we're ultimately going to have to lift the subframe because we're going to need to trim this air boot. I'll show you why here in just a minute. We want to go ahead and completely remove the back clamp, get it out of the way. So go ahead and back that all the way off until it comes free. Just like that. Careful not to distort it too much. Go ahead and take it off. Set it off to the side. The front one we want to loosen pretty good, but we can go ahead and leave it on the flange. The new air boot on the Sherco's is kind of an old school design, which I like. They've got it held in with a metal flange and several small bolts. We're going to go ahead and take it off here in a minute, but just to show you that you can remove the carburetor without lifting the subframe, you want to just push gently back onto that rubber air boot, turn the carb slightly off to the side, and gently remove it out of there. Just like so. The reason we need to remove the subframe and do some trimming inside of it is because of the elliptical shape of the venturi on the Keihin Airstriker 2. You'll note that it's thicker at top, smaller at the bottom. Inside the air boot there's a molded in rubber ridge that mimics this shape. This thick area on top has the tendency to mask our vent scoop, and we need to make sure that this is completely open inside the air box and that it can read the air density inside the air box on the downstream side of the filter. So we're going to next lift the subframe, and then we're going to remove the air boot, and I'm going to show you how to trim this area out. Okay, we're now going to show you how to lift the subframe so that we can remove the air boot in order to do our trimming. The best way to do that is to remove the side panels first. Get those out of the way. So we can get the silencer out. Okay, we've got the bolts out of our silencer. We're going to go ahead and slide it off at the end of the pipe. Get it out of the way. Then want to go ahead and remove our subframe connectors. Raise our subframe and lock it in place. Go ahead and remove our filter. One thing about the Sherco is it kind of displays some old school thought where they use a metal flange inside of here with a support for the filter. We're going to have to go ahead and remove these 6 small screws in order to get the filter out. Okay, we had to remove the other side panel as well to gain access to these 3 little nuts that are on this side. Luckily the air boot's real pliable, so we'll just go up, get all those out. We'll go ahead and remove this and show you how to trim it. Okay, now that we've removed our 6 fasteners that hold this together, we're going to go ahead and remove this metal flange out of the way and take our rubber lip and just feed it through the subframe. There we go, like that. Set these down. We can go ahead and just leave that on there. Again, the area in question is this heavy molded in rubber ridge up in this area here. So we're going to want to kind of identify the area that we need to trim out. To do that, we're going to go ahead and slip our SC2 into the air boot at what we would determine to be pretty much a straight orientation. We'll allow a little extra in there in order to get a room in case we need to rotate this slightly once it's installed. Might be able to look down in there. It's definitely blocked. Okay, so we're going to want to grind that area out. So what we'll note is there's a parting line at the top of the air boot. We're going to go ahead and go off about 3/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch on either side of that and remove that material. Okay, going to want to clamp it gently in a vise, being careful not to deform this flange in any way, just enough to hold it while we do our work. The best way to go about this is to use a barrel grinder attached to a Dremel tool, or a metal burr works just as well. Okay. Again, we note our parting line. We're going to want to go off on both sides a little bit so we have plenty of area there in order to clear the vent scoop when we install it on the bike. We want to gently remove this down. We can take the whole thing off if we want. There's no real concern about penetrating through. This is a pretty thick area. Pay attention naturally, but go ahead and use some confidence in taking that material out of the way. Gentle strokes across there while we just gently remove material, kind of spreading our effort back and forth across from both sides. Okay, we're getting pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit more out of there, and then we'll go inspect it by putting the carburetor in it, making sure that's clear. Okay, one thing to make mention of is when you're grinding, there is a small bit of dust that comes off of this rubber material, so it is advisable to wear a particle respirator of some sort, even just a cotton mask, to avoid breathing any of this fine particulate. Once you get done with your grinding, take compressed air, blow all the little bits of material out of there carefully, make sure that everything's clean. So this is kind of the shape that we want to look at. We have a nice thin area at the top now to fit our air scoop. Take your time, move methodically, do small bits at a time while mocking it up to make sure you don't overdo it. But this is about what it's going to want to look like when you're done. So we're going to fit it one more time, double check our work, and then we'll reinstall it back on the bike. We should now see a nice clean vent scoop that is able to read the air pressure inside of the airbox. Okay, in order to use the stock throttle cable, we're going to have to remove the stock cable guide from the Keehan carburetor. We're going to use a 10mm long socket in order to be able to tighten it onto the smart carb. Threads are the same as what we use on our smart carb, so we're just going to put this on and tighten it down all the way. We'll have enough cable adjustment from the handlebar side, if any is necessary. Again, use a long 10mm, or just snug that down, not too tight. Now that we've got our cable guide installed, we're going to go ahead and remove the cap off of the SC2. Again, a number 3 Allen. That spring and gently let the slide out, and we're going to be careful not to lose our throttle turn spring retainer. Now we're going to go over to the bike. Okay, now that we've trimmed out the air filter side air boot in order to accommodate our float bowl pressurization air density correction circuit, our vent scoop located at the top of the venturi, we're going to want to go ahead and take a look at the intake flange on the engine side as well. The trough of our venturi floor is lower than the Keehan, and we want to have a smooth airflow into the intake side of the engine, so there's a pretty good chance there's going to be a molded in rubber ridge inside the intake flange as well. And we're going to want to slip this in there and look and see if it's advisable to trim this out. It's not as important as the air filter side, but it does help to transition the airflow into the reeds, and it could improve the low speed characteristics to a degree. So we're going to pull our plug out. Go ahead and slip our SC2 in there and see how much rubber is sticking up at the bottom. Okay, and as you can see, we do have a pretty good portion of rubber that is sticking up at the trough or the floor of the venturi. So we're probably going to want to get in there and carve that little bit of area out just to smooth the airflow and give it a better transition into the reeds. Okay, even though this is a brand new bike and we can anticipate that the reeds are integral and that they're in good condition, if you're going to take the intake reed boot off, it's always a good idea to go ahead and inspect the reeds at the same time. Okay, now that we've got all the bolts loose, we're just going to go ahead and remove the reeds, the gaskets, and the flange together if we can, and keep track of how all that came apart. So we're going to go ahead and attach the carburetor to it in the general orientation with the notch on top, and then we can clearly see the area that we need to trim out. I'm just going to lightly score that real quick with this sharp point, and then take it over and use our barrel grinder again to take that small area out. Okay, so we've teardrop shaped the intake flange to kind of match our Venturi shape. We're going to go ahead and trial fit it real quick just to see how it fits, and then we'll probably reinstall it back on the motor if we're good. So the idea is not to completely flatten it out, but just to give it a nice transition so that there's not a sharp ridge for the air fuel mix to have to jump up over. This will improve the bottom end performance a little bit. So now, before we reinstall the reeds and the intake flange, we want to go ahead and inspect our reeds just to take a good look at them to see if they're in good shape. This is the new V-Force 4R. They're great reeds. Obviously there's no issues with them to speak of. That's why most of the manufacturers are using them, but it is advisable to hold them up to the light and see if they're really out of shape or warped or anything to any great degree. There's a lot of misconception out there about the reeds being curled up a little on the edges with some daylight showing through them. We don't see any on these. That's not really an issue because the crankcase pressures that are slapping those reeds shut with a good force will certainly overcome any deformity that the reeds are. If you're seeing a little bit of light, it's not that much to be concerned about. These look really good, so we're going to put them back on. Okay, we're going to go ahead and put our intake flange and reeds back in, same order it came off. Some additional things to look for on your reeds while you've got them out that can cause some running issues, and especially with the Smart Carb, it's sensitive to any deficiencies that the engine may have, so it's worth taking your time. Things that can cause issues are damaged or fretted reeds, with the tips being cracked or damaged or missing will cause issues. Reeds that are of the wrong size, that don't fit the closings or seal permanently or adequately like they should, you may want to replace the reeds themselves. Bad reeds will cause a signal loss to the carburetor. It has a hard time starting. Could display some light load misfiring in the low speeds. Could also cause some hard running on the top end wide open if they're not working correctly. So you want to make sure your reeds are in good shape. Okay, now that we've made sure that our reed block is good and snug, we've tightened it pretty good. You don't want to over tighten it and deform the surfaces, but you want to make sure it's good and snug so there's no air leaks. We're going to go ahead and pull our plug out. If you don't have a plug to use, I recommend a rag or anything in there just so something doesn't fall down in the engine while you're working on it. It's always a good policy. We're going to go ahead and slip the carburetor in and loosely attach it with the hose clamp on the reed block side to begin the installation process. I'm going to turn the screw gear off to the side a little bit because on this new Sherco intake flange, which they tell us is 15 millimeters shorter than before, it can cause a little interference with your screw gear and the flange bolt. So I'd go underneath of that just a little bit to get it started. Make sure that it's lined up inside of the grooves for the clamp itself. So I'm going to have to get a little creative here. And start snugging that down just a little bit. I'd go right above that bolt. And we're just going to want to tighten it to where it's just somewhat snug. It can't come out. Okay. Now we're going to want to go ahead and attach our cap and our slide. Simple process, just like inverse of the keyhin. We're going to go ahead and take our screws out so we don't lose them here. Pull all the cable in play out and attach our spring. Slide it up over the cable. Our cable retainer washer goes on last. Hold him down. Then we just want to thread the cable through the slide and into the location notch. Turn everything loose. kind of straighten your spring out, make sure it's kind of got a nice belly to it, it's kind of loose. And then we're going to go ahead and fish it back through these wires. We'll push our dust cover down, make sure it's on there tight. We want to go through the clutch line and the wiring and temperature sensor that they've got right there. Again, we want to treat the metering rod with a lot of respect. We don't want it to get damaged in any way. So we're going to gently work its way down into the slide cavity while getting our cap threaded through there until we can see that it slides down gently onto the carburetor. Give ourselves a little bit of extra cable there. Go ahead and attach our 4 3mm mounting screws. Again, not overly tight, but good and snug. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and lower the subframe. Work it past the shock, the air boot. Make sure our dust cover is going down past the front of the tire. Sherco's got a few wires and some things in the way. We want to make sure those are out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and get it started into the air boot. Again, the carburetor can be taken out and reinstalled without removal of the subframe, but because we had to trim the subframe, we wanted to go ahead and check our cable in play while we still had it all off. The Smart Carb has more clearance than the Keihin did, especially in this front area. It's still a little close at the well where the drain is, but there's still plenty of room under there, so it allows us to orient it to just about any location we want, really, without the tank on. We'll have to see how it looks once the tank's on, but it looks like we got a lot better clearance than what the Keihin had. Another thing we want to point out is because we've gone to the trouble of opening up this area on top, not to cause any obstruction with our vent screw, it's recommended that we turn the clamp upside down, put the worm gear at the bottom or off to the side as much as we can. With the new SC2 we can't quite go under it. We're going to want to offset it over here somewhere so that we're not pinching down on top of the air boot. So we're going to put it in the same location. Get it started. Make sure that the band of the clamp is in between the two ridges on the air boot so that it's pinching down correctly. Same with on the front side. I'm going to rotate this one back just a little bit. We feel that we're pretty happy with our locations, so we're going to go ahead and tighten those down. Anytime you're using a socket for a clamp ring gear or clamp with the worm gear on it, I recommend only using a hand set to tighten it down. Don't use a ratchet. You'll overstress the gear and it can actually cause the boot to pop off later because it's distorting it and pushing it down. So just a good snug fit. Same with the back side. Just use normal hand strength. Don't try to overstress everything. If there's a bit of a leak, we'll notice it right away. There shouldn't be, but we want to give it just a nice smug turn. You should be able to turn it just slightly. The rubber should follow along. If it does, then we can say we're probably pretty tight. Okay, again, the Sherco has kind of a different arrangement over here with the petcock. It's cool. I mean, it's right at the bottom of the tank, but this is not a really good clamp, and it's prone to coming off, actually. So you're going to want to pay special attention when you put it back on to make sure that is fully on, clamp is fully on all the way. This time we're going to go across the top of the intake flange rather than underneath of it, so that we can attach the hose to the Smart Carb and hopefully put that in a little bit more of a relaxed position. So I'm going to go ahead and get that line started down in there. Kind of going in the right direction. Okay, feels like it might be a little bit hung up on something over here. Yeah, we have a coolant recovery line that kind of wants to hook underneath of there. You're going to want to pay attention to that as well, and make sure that that is off to the side of the tank like that, like it belongs. Okay, again, that looks pretty good. Double check, make sure that's on all the way. I think we're ready to hook it up. Okay, now that we've got all the plastics, the tank, and the seat back on, we're going to go ahead and attach our fuel line. This time note that we've gone over the top of the intake flange rather than underneath and putting it at a weird angle, so we want to go ahead and go across that way, and then we're going to go ahead and slip it on our fuel inlet. Get it on there nice and tight. And run our clamp down. So that our hose is good and secure. Looks good, nice and tight. Things out of the way. Got a nice curve to our fuel line. So we're going to go ahead and put some fuel in it and fire it up. Okay, we went ahead and put some fuel into the fuel tank. We're going to go ahead and do our first fuel up. We want to leave the choke open on our first fuel up because we want it to help assist purging air out of the float bowl because of our internal check valve features. So we leave the choke open. We're going to reach in here. We're going to go ahead and open this petcock. Turn it all the way on. You don't have to turn it on really fast, just kind of open it a little bit slowly for a second or so, and then go ahead and open it all the way and let our bowl fill up. So that should probably be pretty full. We're about 85 degrees in here today, so I'm just going to go ahead and shut this choke off. I don't believe we're going to need it, and we'll see what it looks like on our first startup.